Welcome to Urban Ed Voyage, the educational podcast that invites you to embark on a transformative journey into innovative education within urban schools. Whether you're passionate about education, an advocate for innovative approaches in urban schools, or simply curious about the possibilities of cutting-edge learning in urban settings, Urban Ed Voyage is your gateway to understanding the phenomena of innovative education. Join us on this enriching journey and let your imagination be drawn to the extraordinary possibilities of modern learning in urban environments. Joey Porter is the magnet coordinator at Louis Armstrong Middle School, where he oversees the performing arts and SAGE magnets. Porter headed up the writing team that created the original proposal for SAGE, social and gender equity, and he continues to nurture the development of this unique magnet program. Porter has a degree in English from the University of Arizona, a master's degree in education, and teaching credentials in special education, multiple subjects, and administration. He is also the author of Autism and Reading Comprehension, a book detailing the curriculum he developed while teaching in a special education classroom. Along with his husband, Porter is the proud parent of 2 teenage sons, both of whom are products of LUSD's amazing schools. We have with us here today Joey Porter from Armstrong Middle School. Thank you, Joey, for joining us here.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Okay. Can you briefly describe the magnet offerings at Armstrong Middle School?
Yeah, sure. So we have 2 magnets at our school. We have a performing arts magnet, which is a very well-established program. People come from far and wide to be in this program, very popular. And then we also have a very different kind of magnet called SAGE, which stands for Social and Gender Equity. And that is a newer program, and that one is about the emphasis there is on student activism, social justice, equity, inclusion, all of those good things.
Okay. So how do you define an inclusive learning environment?
Well, when we first started writing the proposal, we based it off of the California Fair Education Act, which is the law of the state. And that act states that we are to include all students, represent all students, and most importantly, to affirm all students. That's the really important part of that. So we just kind of had that as our foundation, and we built everything from there.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what specific strategies do you employ to create and maintain an inclusive environment?
Okay. So the strategy, and this is more about the performing arts magnet, there's a strategy of like intentionality, like going into a situation knowing that this is the goal, that I'm going to be inclusive, that I'm going to be colorblind. So recently we had these callback auditions for a show called Bye Bye Birdie, which is a period piece set in the 1960s, and there is the female lead is very clearly Latina, and she even has a big song called Spanish Rosie. I mean, it's, should be a Latina girl, in some people's opinion. And so this black girl comes in for the callback, and she wasn't like sort of, mixed looking. She's very, she's a beautiful black girl with long braids and everything. And just knocked the audition out of the park. She was just fantastic, doing the little castanets and, singing it beautifully and acting it beautifully and everything. And so there was just no question that it was going to be her, And so, when we anticipate pushback from parents, well, it's not realistic, and why didn't my Latina daughter get it? And, it's like there's nothing about musicals that are realistic. They're fables. People are breaking out into song in the middle of a baseball game. So it's like, you can suspend disbelief in order to serve diversity and inclusion. That trumps it. That's more important, that you include all kids, And like I told you, I have an older son, 17 years old, and he's a big performing arts kid. And it's just, musical theater is just, I don't know, it's just so white all the time. And it's really hard, and I've watched this little boy grow up with this love of musical theater. And he's always had success. He's always felt affirmed. He's always felt included. But as he gets into high school, and the shows that are chosen are very sort of white-leaning shows, he feels more and more sort of left out. And, and recently he was, it was like neck and neck it was like the romantic lead in the show. And, and I just feel like the black kid needs to be light years better than the white kid in order to be considered. And, he's not. He's a regular kid. He's good, but he's not, this brilliant Broadway-bound performer. And so, sure enough, now all of a sudden, for the first time in 17 years, he's like, Dad, I don't know. I don't think I'm good enough. I don't think I want to do this anymore. And, that kills me as a parent who raised this kid, who had this great love of this, had made all his friends, always felt included, always felt like he had a fair shot. And now all of a sudden he, in his mind, and whether or not it's true, I don't know, but in his mind, he feels like it's not fair.
The playing field's not level.
It's not level. And so, it's funny, we heard about this guy recently, because we're talking about colleges and stuff now, and there is this guy who, he's a black gay man who runs these musical theater departments. He ran NYU, and then this other one in Michigan, this acclaimed musical theater program. And he's talked about this on his podcast. He was like, I'm so tired of hearing about all this talk about safe spaces for black kids in theater. I'm going to Howard. So he picked his little bags up and he went to Howard, and he has created this space, this musical theater space, where all the black kids don't have to worry about it anymore. They just go, they get to be their brilliant selves, they get to blaze with talent, and they have the same shot as everybody else. The whole race thing is just removed. And I don't know if we have to go that far to create safe spaces, but in this guy's professional experience, he was like, this is the only way that I can truly create a safe space.
But we do have to be intentional about creating these safe spaces.
We do. And, it's like, you feel it's really like, let's say you're at a party and you're walking around and you walk into a room and it's a bunch of women, let's say, and they're all like quietly talking with each other, and you walk and they all turn around and look at you like, oh, I guess I don't belong here.
Right. So
you leave. And that's what it becomes like for some of these kids. It's like, this space is not where I belong. And, we're talking about the jazz band before. We have a jazz band at Armstrong Middle School named after a great black musician. And it's all white kids. Now, it's not done intentionally. That's just the way it happened.
Right.
But the reason that it's important to think about these things is that you're a black kid who walks into this room and he sees nothing but white kids, and the conclusion that he's going to come to is, oh, I guess I don't belong here because there's no one that looks like me. So it's just, it's really tough. And it's also in some of these classes too. We talk a lot about, finding kids of color to get them into these gifted and accelerated programs. I had a colleague who was telling me about this black boy who's in an accelerated math program, and the teacher just has this way of, I guess it's her humor, where she kind of singles kids out, and she doesn't do it based on race. She does it to everybody, but she just happens to be doing it with this black kid. And this black kid is now talking about how he gets so stressed out in that classroom. And apparently recently he made a mistake during a test, and she pointed it out to the whole class. And he apparently said that his mind just went blank. So, if your strategy is to like pick on kids and tease kids and stuff, but you're not holding the awareness that you need to make sure that a black kid feels supported and included, maybe don't pick on that one.
Right.
Find another kid if that's what you're going to have to do. Because now this kid feels like, and I don't think it's true, she's not picking on him because of race, But he's going to start questioning that now. And maybe that's why she's picking on me. Maybe I don't belong here.
Right.
So that's a really like vivid example, a real life example of how important it is to make sure that all kids feel included, whether it's a jazz band or an accelerated honors class or whatever the case may be. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Off air, we were talking about how you hope to develop empathy in your students.
Yes.
Can we talk a little bit about what you're doing intentionally
Yes.
to develop empathy with your students?
I think it's so important. And in the SAGE magnet, we have these posters, the SAGE core values in every classroom. And the first one is about empathy. It's so critical because it's connected to everything. It's connected to inclusion and feeling welcome. We had this incident recently where we had like this uptick in hate speech. And it was coming from SAGE kids, of all kids. And so, of course, everyone's like, it's SAGE kids doing hate speech. And so I got the psychiatric social worker that thankfully works at our school, and we were running back there to the classroom, and he had this whole beautiful lesson plan. And we talked to the kids about hate speech, but in the context of empathy. How is it going to make you feel if you hear those words directed to you? Like if you're a Jewish kid and someone says something anti-Semitic to you, how is that going to make you feel? And, it's a hard concept to teach to middle school kids. We were also talking before about social media, and especially during the pandemic, how it creates this sense of disconnect. And I have a 7th grader and I see it. Sometimes I'm like, who are you talking? Like, I don't even understand what you're saying. It's like, I'm a human being, settle down and talk to me. It's like they're so used to not connecting. And connection is empathy. So it's an uphill battle. Middle school, social media, getting kids to understand that there's another person on the end of this hate speech. There's another person on the end of this prank that you think is funny when you're putting the book about Hitler in the Jewish kid's backpack. It's not funny to him. He might try to act like all cool and tough about it, but that was painful. This is obviously a true story. That was painful for him to open that backpack when he got home. Like, why are they doing this to me? So getting kids to understand the importance of empathy and the connection between empathy and something like hate speech. It's very important because hate speech is the number one thing to make you feel like you don't belong.
Right.
So if you're in a group of kids like out at PE or whatever, and they're saying, oh my God, that's so gay, and you got that little kid who's struggling with his sexuality and with his identity going, oh, I guess being gay is a joke. I guess being gay is a bad thing. And so immediately you're putting this kid, you're othering this other kid. You're pushing him to the side. You're making him feel like his very existence is a joke. And that's a very painful thing to do to a kid, especially when they're trying to figure things out. And then to have that kind of pain on top of everything is very, very hard. So getting kids to understand that, I think, is so important and so connected to what we're talking about creating inclusive spaces. Because you can't just wave a magic wand as adults and expect all the kids to be empathetic. But they're a key part of creating these welcome, inclusive spaces. Because if they're not on board, it's not going to happen.
I know that LAUSD has done some work around implicit bias or building the capacity of our educators around implicit bias.
Yeah.
I mean, how else can we support our teachers around like creating these inclusive environments?
I think that's so important, and I want as we move through the development of this magnet, I want that to be more of an active role of mine. Because they're busy, they're trying to cover the standards and the core content, and you've got a complex magnet like the SAGE magnet. Integrating that theme is tricky, and it's a constant job. And so when something like this comes up, that's where, it's important to sort of swoop in and to kind of put the emphasis on it. They're putting the emphasis on history and math and science. Hopefully, not hopefully, they are with the SAGE theme, with a SAGE twist to it. But when something like this happens, where the bullying and the hate speech and the contributing to a non-inclusive environment comes up, that's where we, people who are outside of the classroom, have to swoop in and kind of say, this is important, okay? It is just as important. We're going to take the whole period to talk about how important this is. It's just as important as everything that you're learning every other day. It's part of your program. The adults have so much impact on what is emphasized. It's up to us, you know. If we let the kids handle it and fester in the shadows and do what they want without drawing attention to it, shining a light onto it, then it's just going to continue and get worse and worse. But man, when you shine a light on it, you know, when we went back there, when there was that little uptick in hate speech, and I, you know, accidentally on purpose actually used the quote that we saw on Snapchat, and I looked right at the kid, and looked right down at the table. He was like, oh my God, they're talking about me. Mm-hmm. And he knew it. And instead of clowning around with his boys like he was at the beginning, I could see the change in his face. Like he was like, this is important. Mr. Porter and Mr. Joshua wouldn't be back here if it wasn't important. So I think that's really critical that teachers are supported with those kinds of things, because they're just as important as everything else.
Right. In what ways are students encouraged to contribute to and shape the inclusive culture of the school?
Well, the kids obviously have to be on board. If the kids aren't on board, everything's going to fall apart. Mm-hmm. So you can't have kids running around making people not feel included and affirmed, you know, because that's going to ruin everything. So we have lots of different ways that we try to encourage kids to create this, or to contribute to creating to this space that is inclusive and affirming. And one of the most powerful ways that we do this is through this film class that they take in 8th grade, where they are encouraged to tell stories about people who have been othered or marginalized, you know, people who've been sort of pushed to the side, make stories about or tell stories about issues that they're concerned about, you know, and when you do this, you contribute to this culture of like, oh, well, that story is important enough to have a film made about it. Maybe my story is important too. You know, you see yourself reflected through things like film, even if it's a student film, especially if it's a film made by one of your peers. Mm-hmm. So, and you know, and I just had an exciting conversation just yesterday with two just very bright 8th grade girls who want to do a little mini documentary about Drag Queen Story Hour, which, you know, as you probably know, is a sort of a hot topic, sort of controversial. And, you know, they're bringing a unique perspective to it because they actually experienced it for themselves. As part of our program last year, we invited Pickle the drag queen to come in and do a Drag Queen Story Hour, very much with the purpose of, you know, we highlighted the fact that this is a controversial thing, guys, and you know we front loaded them with the news stories and about the protests that often have turned violent. Even, you know, Proud Boys showing up at these, you know, these little events in libraries where there's kids around and stuff, and we told them all about it, and then we actually let them experience it for themselves, so they can see. In this case, squeaky clean, G-rated. Can't talk about all of the Drag Queen Story Hours out there in the world, but this one I saw for myself. It couldn't have been more beautiful, more joyful. This drag queen, Pickle, was connecting with the kids in the way that a brilliant elementary school teacher would, you know, so warm and so loving, and you know, we had this this craft activity where they're going to make their drag queen paper bag puppets afterwards, and I was like, Pickle, let's go. You're on the clock. Come on, we got to go make our puppets. Mm-hmm. But because she was taking so long, because the kids wanted to keep engaging with her, because she was so loving and so interested in what they were saying, and so that's what they experienced during their Drag Queen Story Hour. So now, when they go out into the world and they hear this talk about, you know, horrible, the horrors of the drag queen story that's all destroying the kids and all this stuff, they can actually say, well, I was there. I experienced it. And this was my experience. And so it's very exciting to me that these kids are now able to tell this story through a film, a short film, a little documentary, that they'll be able to tell that story in an even wider way. And I'm encouraging them, too, to tell the story in a balanced way. Like all good documentaries, you have to tell both sides, and make sure that you're looking at it through a wide lens. So you find someone who does have a problem with it and ask them why. What is it about this that is such a problem for you? And I have to tell you, too, while I was there, witnessing the joy and the laughter and the sequins and the sparkles and stuff, there was this 8th grade musical theater boy who was identifying as LGBTQ, and the look on his face when he was watching, the joy on his face when he was watching this drag queen be her best drag queen self, I was so proud in that moment that I was able to sort of create this space where this boy was looking around the room at all his peers who were laughing and enjoying it just as much as him, that he was like, I am so included in this moment right now. Not just included, but celebrated. And he's going to go on to have a life where, he's going to have lots of things like this. I mean, where he goes, because there's a lot of joy in gay culture. And this Drag Queen Story Hour is an example of it. And so to have his identity not just included but celebrated in this way was pure magic and made the whole thing worth it, because trust me, there's a lot of pushback on it. But we know why we were doing it. We know the loving and inclusive reasons why we were doing it. And so we stood firm. Myself, my principal, everyone involved stood firm in the knowledge of what we were the truth of what we were doing.
Did you ever receive any pushback from teachers, or rather from the community or your parents?
Oh my gosh, yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, a lot. Not a lot, but enough. We had this who was a sage mom, who was very upset that her son was in a classroom where a teacher said, it's okay to be gay. Mm-hmm. And she was there to say that it wasn't okay to be gay, and started talking about the fire and the brimstone and all this kind of stuff. And I made it clear to her as much as I could that the teachers are not back there teaching anyone to be gay, which you can't do any more than you can teach someone to be straight. But what they were doing by saying it's okay to be gay is teaching the kids to be kind to a kid who is or perceived as part of the LGBTQ community, not one of the most bullied student population anywhere. And how important that is to be kind, and we're trying to create kind kids. So then I sort of turned it gently back to her, and I said, do you want your son to be someone who's cruel to a kid who's part of the LGBT community, or would you want him to be kind? And then, of course, with tears in her eyes, she said, I want him to be kind. And then I was like, okay, then. Well, that's what we're doing back there. So she ended up keeping her son in the program, and he learned a lot. Mm-hmm. He had great success. And it turned out to be wonderful. But, there is that pushback, and it doesn't, come always from the sage parents. That one was kind of a surprise. But, it does come from other parents, whether I hear, them talking about how they don't want their kid to go to that school because it has this perception or that perception. I mean, they're really arguing against teaching kids to be kind, which obviously is not what we're trying to do.
Okay. You were part of one of the founders of this particular magnet.
Yes.
And that was a few years back.
It was.
Now, reflecting on where you've come to this point, what advice would you have given Joey 4 years ago or 5 years ago?
Well, I would have told him that this was going to be a tough sell, that it was going to be tricky to work with these perceptions. People, are always calling us the woke magnet. You hear that a lot. And I'm not sure why that is a negative thing to be inclusive and equitable, but it becomes political, It's like it kind of gets out of your hands and it just becomes a political sort of hot potato. And, and then people's sort of hidden biases come out a little bit, Like I told you before, I heard at this, at a birthday party, the dads are all, yeah, you're doing great work. And then I hear a year later, oh, my husband wouldn't allow our son to go into it, And I'm like, why? Like, well, he thinks it's, it's the gay magnet. And it's not. It's just like I said to that mom, it's about teaching kids to be kind to all kids, including gay kids. And that's all it is. But so that perception, I would tell, the younger, more innocent Joey about that, that there was going to be a lot of challenges along the way, but that it was worth it, and that it was worth it to create this space where these kids can have a sense of belonging. It's just so important that some of the most moving stories that I've heard from SAGE parents are the parents of the kids who might be perceived a little bit as a misfit, but still has obviously a lot to offer. And when they're in a program like SAGE, where they're constantly hearing from the adults and the posters on the wall are telling them that everyone is included, then they start thinking, oh, maybe I'm included. So maybe I can now relax, and maybe now I can start to achieve. And then lo and behold, they do. And because of that comfort that comes from feeling included, they are able to become the best versions of themselves. And, hearing the story from a mom with tears pouring down her cheeks it just means the world to me that, those kids, the ones who need to find their tribe, are able to find their tribe and to grow and thrive in ways that their parents are very surprised and delighted by.
Right, and they need to be in places that are welcoming and that they feel that are safe.
Yes.
And that they feel that people get them or understand them or believe in them and appreciate them.
Yes,
in order to thrive.
Right, and that's where the emphasis is. It's about keeping you safe. It's about protecting you from things like hate speech, about being pushed out of a group because you're this or you're that, or addressing the fact that you're doing something anti-Semitic by putting that Hitler book in the backpack. It's important, and we're going to address it, and we're going to deal with it. So that kid who was horrified by that Hitler book goes, oh, okay, it's being addressed. It's important. It's not something that's just shuffled off to the side. Emphasis is key.
Right, we have too many kids who are in positions in spaces where they don't feel that, and we've heard all the horror stories.
Yes.
So this is one of the reasons why this is a fantastic opportunity for a lot of our families.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay. So we like to do a little something called speed round.
Okay.
And we're laughing because Joey likes to talk. So
how could you tell?
Let's see how speedy this round is.
Yes.
Okay. So my first question is, what is one book that all educators should read?
Okay. So when I was getting my administrative credential, I read this book called How to Be an Anti-Racist, which I think is so connected to this conversation that we're having, because as educators, it's not enough to just not be a racist. You have to figure out ways to push against it, to move against it. So it's eradicated, even if it's just in your own space, even if it's just in your classroom. Raise that awareness, like my jazz band awareness was raised. It's like, look around your classroom. Is everyone being represented? Are all the different races, are all the different gender identities represented? It's so important. We have this wonderful librarian. Her name is Blair Carroll, and she just did this display recently in the library, which for Valentine's Day, so it was all romance books. And every single kind of romance that you could possibly imagine is represented on those shelves. So she is like pushing back. She's like making moves. She's not just like talking the talk. She's like actually showing the kids that I'm going to like be sort of aggressive, including everybody. And I think that in order to create that balance, because we still have a lot of balancing to do, we are not there yet, that you need to really push for it. You need to be anti. It's not just enough to be okay with it. You need to like be proactive with it.
Great.
Is that speedy enough for you?
Yeah, that's speedy enough for me. So you do a lot of work. You do a lot of great work.
Yeah,
I'm
thank
sure
you.
it's stressful.
Oh, so stressful.
And emotionally draining.
Yes.
And plus, you have 2 teenage boys.
Yes, I do.
So how do you take care of yourself? What do you do for self-care?
I think the better way to frame that question is what do I not do for self-care? I am a pampered boy. I like to take care of myself. I'll go to my hot yoga class and I'll go straight to the massage. I get my nails done all the time. I'm always shopping. And so, I definitely know how to take care of myself.
Great. So I'm glad that you do have balance.
I do.
And my final question is, what inspirational quote do you live by?
Yes, I love this question. Up on the wall of my office, I have a poster with a Harvey Milk quote that says, "Hope is never silent." And Harvey Milk is a huge personal hero of mine. And he had this very hopeful, utopian vision in his head about the state of California. He was on the Board of Supervisors in San Francisco for a very brief time before he was tragically assassinated. But before he was able to push through this hopeful, utopian vision of a state where you could no longer discriminate with housing, with employment, public services, any of it based on sexual orientation. And this was like back in the 70s. This was like a big swing.
Right.
And he was like, I'm going to do this. I have the right kind of hope in my head. I'm doing this out of love. I'm doing this out of a pure and good place. So let the haters hate. I'm going to move forward this because I know that this is the right thing to do. So I love having that poster on my wall because we do get pushback and we do hear veiled or not so veiled bigotry coming at us because of what we're trying to do in this program. And I just, I'm able to stay on track with Harvey's words right there that I can see all the time and just remain hopeful.
Well, thank you. Keep fighting this great fight.
Thank you. I will.
So thank you for joining us today. We appreciate this conversation.
Thank
And
you.
Who knows, we might have you back here again.
I would love it. I'll be back.
Okay, thank you, Joey.
Thank you, Keith.
As we close this podcast, let's remember 3 key points. Firstly, the significance of having role models extend beyond personal inspiration. It also showcases diversity, motivating others along the way. The story of the beaming child is a beautiful one. We all should see a reflection that is respected and honored. Secondly, inclusivity isn't just about being nice. It's about striving to understand one another, fostering empathy and connection. The Sage Magnet isn't about teaching a kid to be this or that. At the most empirical level, it's about ensuring kids are nice to all kids. Isn't that a parent's dream? And finally, let's acknowledge the profound responsibility of educators to safeguard, uplift, and empower students in their journey towards knowledge and self-discovery. Let's continue to champion diversity, inclusivity, and empowerment in all facets of our lives. At a recent Black Student Family Day, I had the pleasure of listening to Dr. Bettina Love speak. Dr. Love directs us to be more than just allies. She implores us to use our positionality and behave as co-conspirators. It's time we answer the call. Until next time, stay inspired and keep spreading positivity.